This is our financial markets market view presentation. I am Choi Yee Lee.
I am Choi Yee Lee.
I am Khesia Budiman.
Today we're going to analyze the Australian dollars against British pound, the Australian dollars against Japanese yen. And now I will discuss the background of AUD, JPY, and JBP. The official currency of Australia is AUD. The Australian Central Bank is Reserve Bank of Australia. The Australian dollar was the fifth most traded currency in the world, accounting for 6.9% of the world's daily share. It trades in the world foreign exchange markets behind the US dollar, the euro, the yen, and the pound sterling. And also, Japan is the Australian's second largest export market, behind only China. The AUD is heavily affected by China and other Asian import markets due to the substantial raw material export. The official currency of Japan is JPY, and the Central Bank of Japan is the Bank of Japan. JPY is the third traded currency in the foreign exchange market after the United States dollar, the euro. JPY is also the most traded currency in Asia. The UK's central bank is the Bank of England. In 1971, the pound was changed to a free-floating currency. As the fourth most traded currency, the British pound is the third most held reserve currency in the world. To determine the exchange rate, we can use the economic indicators such as relative inflation rate, commodity prices, relative interest rate, relative economic growth rates, international speculation, exchange rate expectations, and government intervention. But in this presentation, we will only cover three economic indicators, which is relative inflation rate, commodity prices, and the relative interest rate. And now I will hand it into Choi to discuss the AUD versus JPY.
Hi, I am Choi Yee. Now I will be discuss the AUD versus JPY. According to the Reserve Bank of Australia, the current exchange rate of AUD to JPY is $1 to 83.61 yen. Now, I will first discuss how the inflation rate affects the exchange rate. According to the Reserve Bank of Australia, the Australia inflation rate of December 2017 is 1.9, while the inflation rate of Japan on December 2017 is 1.0. From both of the data just now, we know that the inflation rate of Australia is higher than the inflation rate of Japan. A higher inflation rate in Australia will lead a decrease in demand for export and decrease in the demand for AUD. This is because with higher inflation rate, export will become more expensive. Importers will turn to other countries to get their goods, such as Japan, which has a lower inflation rate compared to Australia. There will be a higher demand in Japanese goods and services. I have constructed a supply and demand curve to support my analysis just now. From the graph, we can see that the supply curve shifts to the right, which means that there is an increase in demand for import and therefore more supply of AUD. And the demand curve shifts to the left, which means that there is a decrease in demand for export and therefore less demand for AUD. This has created a new lower equilibrium. We conclude that higher inflation rate causes the exchange rate to go down, decrease the demand for export and increase the demand for import. With higher inflation rate in Australia, we predict that the AUD will depreciate against JPY. Okay, now I will discuss how the interest rate affects the exchange rate. According to the Reserve Bank of Australia, the interest rate of Australia on 4th April 2018 is 1.5%. While the Japan has a negative interest rate, which is negative 0.1% according to the Bank of Japan. With this information, we are able to find out what is the real interest rate. Well, from the calculation, we found that the real interest rate of Australia is negative 0.4% and interest rate of Japan is negative 0.9%. Australia has a higher interest rate. This will increase the exchange rate, which will encourage the capital inflow and increase the demand for the AUD. We can predict that the AUD will appreciate against JPY. I have constructed a graph to support my discussion. From the graph, we can see that the demand curve shifts right, which means there is an encourages capital inflows and demand for the AUD increase. For example, the investor will take the advantage of higher interest rate to earn more. Therefore, the demand for AUD will increase and supply of AUD will decrease because investor will hold the money to earn more. Therefore, the supply curve will shift to the left. This has created a new higher equilibrium. Lastly, I will discuss how the commodity prices affect the exchange rate. According to the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade of Australian government, Japan is Australia's second largest export market. Australia is a major exporter of commodities such as mineral and agricultural products. Australia's major export to Japan is LNG, coal, iron ores, beef, and copper ores and concentrate. We know that if there is an increase in the commodity prices, there will be an increase in the value of Australia and resulting in the appreciation of AUD. I will give an example to make my discussion more supportive. According to the Index Mundi, we found that the coal prices started to fall from January 2018. When the prices of commodity fall, this will lead the exchange rate to go down and cause a decrease in the value of Australia export. And now, we predict that the AUD will depreciate against JPY. Now I will hand it into Khesia to discuss the AUD versus GBP.
Khesia, and now I will be talking about AUD versus GBP in relation to the same three economic indicators discussed before, which are inflation rate, interest rate, and commodity prices. Before starting, based on Reserve Bank of Australia, the exchange rate of AUD to GBP is now 1 to 0.5467. Now moving on to the inflation rate and how it affects GBP to appreciate or depreciate. Looking from the graph, the Australian inflation rate from September to November 2018 is 1.8, whereas the UK inflation rate is 3.1. Here we know that UK has an inflation rate of 1.3 higher than the Australian interest rate. Thus, demand for UK's export will decrease, and this will reduce the demand for GBP. The reduce of GBP's demand will then cause GBP to reduce in value, and therefore, based on the inflation approach, GBP is expected to depreciate against the AUD in the future. Moving on to the second indicator, which is interest rate. Here we can see that Australian interest rate in November 2017 is 1.5%, while UK's interest rate in the same time period is 0.5%, which is lower than the Australian interest rate. Given the nominal interest rate before, we can obtain each of the real interest rate by subtracting the respective nominal interest rate with the inflation rate. So for Australia, the calculated real interest rate is negative 0.3%, whereas the UK's real interest rate is negative 2.6%. Here we know that Australia has a higher real interest rate than UK. Therefore, this will induce capital inflow to Australia and more of AUD will be demanded, resulting in the expectation of GBP to depreciate in the future against the Australian dollar. The third indicator we are using is commodity prices. To begin with, United Kingdom is the top 8 of Australia's export markets, with the major exported commodities of gold, lead, alcoholic beverages, pearls, and gems. Based on the latest 6 months data of prices of gold in Australia, it shows that prices are going up. This means that more of AUD will be demanded to match the increase in commodity prices, or we can say that the value of Australian exports increases, and therefore it will put an upward pressure on the Australian dollar to appreciate, and in contrast the British pound to depreciate. Here we expected GBP to depreciate against AUD. Okay, So this is the end of our presentation. Thank you.